At 6 in the morning, the phone on my wooden bedside table vibrated with a dull, persistent hum. The house was completely silent, the kind of heavy quiet that only settles over a home after years of living alone. I reached out, my calloused fingers brushing against the cold glass of the screen. I saw a text message from Sean, my only son. The message was short and blunt. Plans changed. You are not coming on the Greece trip next week. Beatrice wants only her family on the boat. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing letters in the dark. For 35 years, I had worked as an industrial marine salvage engineer, raising sunken cargo ships, clearing blocked shipping channels, and managing massive crane barges in ports along the Pacific coast. I spent my life dealing with rusted steel, high-pressure hydraulics, and calculated risks. I knew exactly how much stress a cable could take before it snapped. I knew how to identify a structural crack in a hull before it caused a ship to founder in deep water. But as I sat there in the quiet of my bedroom, I realized I had completely failed to see the structural failure inside my own family. I remember a salvage job back in 1998 off the coast of Oregon, where a 10,000-ton cargo carrier had run aground on a jagged reef. The hull was cracked, and the shipping company wanted to pull it off the reef immediately. I stood on the salvage barge looking at the tension gauges and told them that if they pulled now, the hull would split in two and the ship would sink in the deep channel. They did not listen. They pulled, the hull snapped, and the ship went down. That day, I learned that you cannot rush a salvage. You have to stabilize the load, secure the leverage, and wait for the right tide. It was a lesson in patience and structural physics that I applied to every project thereafter. I built a reputation as the man you called when a ship was stuck in the worst possible place. For 35 years, I was the one who solved the problems no one else could. I made a fortune doing it, but I always lived simply, putting my money into trust and investing in my family's future. My late wife, Clara, passed away 3 years ago after a long, grueling fight with cancer. We had been married for 38 years. Clara was a gentle woman who loved the sea, and we had met 40 years ago in a quiet, sun-drenched bay in Santorini, Greece, when I was working on a salvage project near the harbor. Before she died, she held my hand in the hospital room and told me her final wish was to have her ashes scattered in that same bay where our life together had started. I promised her I would do it. I spent 3 years planning this trip. It was not a cheap vacation, it was a sacred duty. I booked a 2-week charter of a luxury sailing catamaran to navigate the Cyclades Islands, paying a total of $65,000 in full from my personal savings account. I wanted it to be a family event. I invited Sean and his wife, Beatrice, hoping we could share the memory of Clara together. But Beatrice came from the Geller family, people who considered themselves part of the high society elite in Santa Barbara. Her parents, Richard and Helen Geller, always looked at my rough, grease-stained hands and my simple blue-collar speech with open disdain. To the Gellers, I was just a crude marine mechanic, an embarrassment to their refined social circle. Yet they had never hesitated to accept the financial benefits that came from my hard work. I had helped Sean establish his own maritime logistics consultancy, putting up $150,000 of my own money as seed capital 5 years ago, a loan that he had never bothered to pay back. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and brewed a pot of black coffee. The kitchen window looked out over the ocean, the gray morning light reflecting off the quiet waves. My hand was perfectly steady as I poured the coffee. Decades of working on pitching ship decks in heavy storms had taught me to keep my balance no matter what. But my chest felt tight, and a cold anger was beginning to replace the initial shock. I walked to my study and turned on the computer. I logged into the charter company's reservation portal, entering the private booking code for our Greek sailing catamaran. The screen loaded slowly, the blue light reflecting off my face in the dark room. When the passenger list appeared, my eyes narrowed. My name, George Miller, the owner of the credit card that paid the $65,000, was completely gone. In its place were the names of Richard Geller and Helen Geller. They had been added to the manifest 2 days ago. The system log showed the modification had been made using the secondary guest login I had shared with Sean so he could help upload our passports and travel documents. My son had personally logged into the system and deleted his own father from the trip. He had handed my seat, and the trip meant to honor his late mother, to his demanding in-laws. They thought I was just an old, tired man who would accept this humiliation in silence. They thought a 68-year-old retired salvage engineer would simply sigh, stay home, and let them enjoy a luxury vacation on my dime. They believed my age made me weak and easily pushed aside. But they did not understand that in my line of work, when you find a structural column that is completely rotted through, you do not try to patch it. You clear the area, place the demolition charges, and bring the entire rotten structure down to the ground. I set my coffee cup down on the desk. The ceramic clinked against the wood. I clicked on my bank portal to check the accounts linked to my industrial consulting firm. What I saw next made my blood run cold. The stolen trip was only the surface of a much deeper, more dangerous crack. The bank statement on my computer screen showed 3 recent transactions that had nothing to do with my daily living expenses or the Greece trip. Over the past three weeks, 3 separate withdrawals of $9. $500 had been made from my business consulting account. The total was $28,500. I stared at the numbers. As a marine salvage engineer, I was trained to analyze patterns. In my industry, if 3 cargo holds on a ship start taking on water at the exact same rate, it is not a random leak. It is a deliberate breach. The amount of $9,500 for each withdrawal was highly specific. Under federal banking laws, any transaction of $10 or more triggers an automatic currency transaction report to the government. By keeping each withdrawal at $900, whoever was draining my account was intentionally structuring the transactions to avoid triggering bank security alerts. I checked the authorized signatures for the business account. The secondary access belonged to Sean, whom I had added years ago when he was helping me manage the administrative side of my salvage consulting contracts. He had used that access to slip into the account and quietly drain $28,500 in cash. I walked up to the counter where a senior teller named Evelyn, who had handled my accounts for 15 years, greeted me with a warm smile. I asked her to print the detailed ledger for the business consulting account. As she handed me the printout, her smile faded into a look of concern. She leaned in and whispered that Sean had come in 3 times over the past month, always at the drive-through window, requesting cash withdrawals of exactly $9,500. She said she had asked him if everything was all right, and he had claimed he was paying off subcontractors for one of my salvage consulting projects. Evelyn knew my business practices. She knew I rarely paid in cash, but since Sean was an authorized signer, she had to process the requests. Seeing the dates on the ledger, I realized he had timed the withdrawals to coincide with my hospital stay. He knew I would be too heavily medicated to check my phone notifications or log into my online banking. The calculation of it all was what stung the most. It was not just a crime of opportunity, it was a planned, systematic draining of my operating capital. I felt a cold sensation in the pit of my stomach. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the young man whose college education I had paid for, and whose business I had funded. He was not just excluding me from a trip, he was stealing from me behind my back. I picked up my phone and dialed Sean's number. I needed to hear his voice, to see if he had any explanation for the text message and the missing funds. My training would never allow me to ignore a major structural leak once it was detected. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. It was not Sean. It was Beatrice. Her voice came through the speaker, dripping with the superficial, sugary politeness she always used when she wanted to mask her hostility. "Good morning, George," Beatrice said. "Are you calling for Sean? He is actually out running some errands for the trip. We are so busy packing. I just read Sean's text message, Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice flat and even, the same tone I used when briefing salvage crews before a dangerous dive. Why was my name removed from the catamaran charter? I paid $65,000 for that trip. It was meant to fulfill Clara's final wish. I heard a soft, dismissive sigh on the other end. "Oh, George, please do not make a scene. We did this for your own good. You are 68 years old, and you just had knee surgery 3 months ago. The Mediterranean can be very rough, and a sailing catamaran is not a safe place for an elderly man with mobility issues. If you fell or got injured out at sea, it would ruin the entire trip for everyone. We decided it was much better for you to stay home and rest. My parents are coming along to help watch the kids and assist Sean. It is really the most sensible arrangement. Your parents did not pay for the trip, Beatrice, I said. Well, George, you have plenty of money, she said, her voice turning sharp and condescending. And let's be honest, you do not really belong on a luxury yacht with people like my parents. You would just be uncomfortable. We will handle all the details for you. Just stay home, relax, and let us manage the estate matters. You do not need to stress yourself with financial decisions at your age. Before I could answer, she hung up the phone. The line went dead, the empty dial tone echoing in the quiet room. Beatrice thought she had put me in my place. She thought an old blue-collar mechanic would simply submit to her snobbery and let them sail away on my money. But her comment about managing my estate matters caught my attention. It was a slip of the tongue, a loose thread that I immediately began to pull. I got into my truck and drove toward the county records office in Santa Barbara. I had a bad feeling in my gut, the same feeling I got when a salvage crane began to groan under an unbalanced load. Something was terribly wrong, and I needed to find the source before the entire foundation collapsed. The county records office in Santa Barbara was quiet, smelling of old paper and industrial floor cleaner. I sat at a computer terminal, my fingers typing in my property details. I owned a 4-acre coastal property in Santa Barbara, a beautiful home overlooking the ocean that I had built with my own hands 20 years ago. The property was worth at least $3,500,000 and was held inside my private family trust, the Miller Family Trust. When the title search results loaded, my hands tightened on the edge of the desk. The property title had been transferred. According to the official records, 3 weeks ago, a quitclaim deed had been filed, transferring the ownership of my Santa Barbara home from my trust to an entity called Golden Coast Properties, LLC. The document bore my signature, witnessed and stamped by a notary public named Sharon Vance. I stared at the signature. It looked remarkably like my handwriting, but I knew with absolute certainty that I had never signed any deed. The date of the signature was June 14, a day I spent entirely in the recovery ward of the Santa Barbara Surgical Center after my knee operation. I was under heavy sedation and could barely hold a pen, let alone sign a legal property transfer. I walked out of the records office, my mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The $28,500 that Sean had withdrawn from my consulting account was not just for travel gear. It was the bribe money used to pay Sharon Vance, the notary, to forge my signature and backdate the deed. They had transferred my $3,500,000 home into their own LLC while I was incapacitated in the hospital. I drove directly to Sean and Beatrice's house, a smaller home in a nearby suburb that I had helped them purchase. I parked my truck down the street, hidden under the shade of a large eucalyptus tree. I walked quietly up the driveway, my boots making no sound on the gravel. I walked around to the side of the house, near the open French doors that led to the patio. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. I stood behind the thick hibiscus bushes, the scent of the flowers heavy in the warm air. Beatrice was sitting on a lounger, sipping iced tea while looking at a brochure for the Greek islands. Her mother, Helen Geller, was sitting next to her, critiquing the itinerary. I just hope the catamaran is as luxurious as they claim. Beatrice, Helen said, adjusting her designer sunglasses, I do not want to spend 2 weeks on a cramped boat with a smelly toilet. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Don't worry, Mom. It's a 50-foot lagoon catamaran, the best model they have. George paid for the premium package, including a private chef and a captain, and since he won't be there to ruin the atmosphere with his dirty hands and talk about shipyards, we can actually enjoy ourselves. Richard Geller, her father, walked out of the house holding a glass of wine. Is the old man's house officially ours now? He asked. Sean walked out behind him, looking pale. Yes, the deed is registered, Sean said, his voice quiet. But I still feel sick about it. If he finds out before we leave, Beatrice interrupted him, her voice dripping with irritation. Sean, grow a spine. Your father is 68. He's got a bad knee and he's lonely. He's not going to check the county land registry. Even if he does, Sharon backdated the notary stamp to June 14. We can easily argue that he signed it before his surgery to clear his business debts, and that he's just forgetting things now. The law will side with us. Once we sell the Santa Barbara property, we'll buy that place in Montecito, and your father will be comfortable in a nice, quiet retirement home in Bakersfield. It's a win-win for everyone. I stood in the shadows of the patio, my back pressed against the warm stucco wall. The betrayal cut deep, a sharp pain in my chest that made it hard to breathe. This was my son, the child I had protected and supported, conspiring with his wife to steal my home and lock me away in a facility. But the pain quickly hardened into something else. In my years as a salvage engineer, I had faced dangerous situations where a single mistake could cost lives. You learn to control your fear and focus entirely on the mechanics of the solution. I walked back to my truck, my face expressionless. I pulled out my phone and called Bradley Thorne, the most respected trust and estate litigation attorney in the county. Bradley was a sharp, aggressive lawyer who had represented several major shipping companies. He was a legal shark who knew exactly how to dismantle fraudulent transactions. "Bradley," I said when he answered, "this is George Miller. I have a major salvage operation on land. My son has forged my signature on a deed to steal my home, and they are preparing to leave the country for a vacation in Greece next week. I need you to prepare the legal charges immediately." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I sat in Bradley Thorne's office in downtown Santa Barbara. The room was decorated with model ships and leather-bound legal books. Bradley sat across from me, reviewing the copies of the quitclaim deed, the bank statements, and the notary information I had gathered. "George," Bradley said, his voice calm but firm, "this is a serious case of fraud. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forgery is a felony. Because the signature on the quitclaim deed was forged, the deed is legally void ab initio. In simple terms, it is void from the beginning. A forged deed has no legal effect whatsoever. It cannot transfer title, even if it was recorded by the county. The property still legally belongs to your family trust. What about the notary?" I asked. "Sharon Vance is going to be in severe trouble," Bradley replied. "I ran a check on her commission. She has had prior complaints for notary misconduct. Once the district attorney's office gets involved, she will likely face criminal charges as an accomplice to forgery. But we also have a civil remedy. Under California Welfare and Institutions Code 1566-1030, your son and daughter-in-law's actions constitute elder financial abuse. Since you are 68 years old, the law protects you from the wrongful taking or appropriation of your property for a wrongful use or with intent to defraud." "What are the consequences of that?" I asked. "It means we can sue them for the return of the funds, the restoration of the property title, and significant civil damages," Bradley explained. "The Elder Financial Abuse Statute allows us to seek treble damages, which is 3 times the actual financial harm, plus all your attorney fees. We can also request an immediate court order to freeze all accounts held by Golden Coast Properties LLC and your son's personal accounts to prevent them from hiding the money." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "But I do not want to just file a lawsuit and wait months for a trial. They are leaving for Greece next week on a catamaran charter that I paid for. I want to halt their voyage before they even step on the boat." Bradley smiled, a sharp, predatory look. "We can do that, George. First, since the charter contract is in your name and was paid with your personal funds, you have the absolute legal right to cancel the booking. You can claw back the entire $65. Zeros and refund from the charter company, citing unauthorized changes to the passenger list. Second, we can file the civil lawsuit for elder financial abuse tomorrow morning. Once the lawsuit is filed, we will serve the papers to their bank, freezing their accounts before they leave. And I want to sell the Santa Barbara house," I added. Bradley Thorne dialed Curtis Payne's direct number. Curtis was a major player in Santa Barbara real estate, a man who had built several luxury boutique hotels along the coast. He had been trying to buy my 4-acre beachfront parcel for years, but I had always refused because Claire and I had built our home there. When Curtis answered, Bradley put him on speaker. "Curtis, I have George Miller in my office," Bradley said. "He is ready to sell the Santa Barbara estate." There was a brief silence, then Curtis's voice came through sharp and alert. "What's the catch, George? You've rejected my offers for 5 years." I leaned toward the phone. "The price is $20,800,000, Curtis. That is $700,000 below market value." But I want the contract signed, the cash wire transferred into my trust account within 48 hours, and I want the deed recorded immediately. More importantly, the moment the deed is recorded, you take full possession. My son and his wife are currently living there, but they are leaving for a trip to Greece on Tuesday. The moment they cross the threshold of the airport, I want your crews to enter the house, clear out every single piece of their furniture, clothes, and personal junk, and change the locks. I want the house stripped bare. Curtis let out a low whistle. Family dispute? A structural demolition, I replied. Do we have a deal? We have a deal, George, Curtis said without hesitation. My lawyers will have the contract ready in 2 hours, and the wire transfer will clear by Friday afternoon. My demolition crew will be standing by on Tuesday morning. That is a massive discount, George, Bradley noted. The money does not matter to me anymore, Bradley, I said. I have my pension and my savings. What matters to me is the demolition of their plan. They wanted to steal my home and sell it behind my back. I am going to sell it right in front of them and use their own greed as the hammer to crush them. I will draft the paperwork immediately, Bradley said. We will file the lawsuit tomorrow, and I will contact Curtis Payne's legal team to arrange the sale. By the time your son's family arrives in Greece, they will find themselves standing on a collapsing deck. I walked out of the office into the warm California sun. The harbor was filled with boats, their masts swaying in the breeze. For 3 years, I had dreamed of sailing those waters to honor Clara. Now I would have to wait, but the salvage operation had begun, and I was going to make sure the wreckage was complete. 6 days later, the afternoon sun beat down on the harbor in Athens, Greece. Sean, Beatrice, and the Geller family arrived at the marina, dragging several expensive designer suitcases. Beatrice wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, her face filled with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed she had finally achieved the high society lifestyle she deserved. Richard and Helen Geller walked behind her, complaining about the heat but eager to board the luxury catamaran. They walked down the dock toward the sleek 50-foot sailing catamaran that was supposed to be their private playground for the next 2 weeks. The captain, a weather-worn Greek man, stood on the deck, reviewing a clipboard. Sean stepped forward, trying to sound confident. "Hello, Captain. I am Sean Miller. We are here to board the charter." The captain looked up, his expression cold and professional. He scanned the clipboard. "Mr. Miller, I am sorry, but your charter has been canceled." Beatrice pushed past her husband, her face flushing with anger. "What do you mean canceled? This trip was paid in full. My father-in-law paid $65,000 for this yacht." "The contract was under the name of George Miller," the captain explained calmly. 3 days ago, the owner of the account canceled the booking and clawed back the entire payment due to unauthorized modifications of the passenger manifest. The charter company returned the funds to his account. As of today, there is no reservation, and the boat is booked for another party. "Run our credit card," Beatrice screamed, pulling a black card from her designer purse. "We will pay for it ourselves." The captain took the card and ran it through his mobile terminal. A sharp, negative beep echoed across the deck. The screen flashed red. Transaction declined. Sean hurriedly pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he logged into his business account app. The screen loaded, displaying a single cold number, 0. The court order filed by Bradley Thorne for elder financial abuse had successfully frozen every account linked to Golden Coast Properties, LLC, and Sean's personal funds. Their credit cards were useless pieces of plastic. The Gellers stood on the hot dock, their expensive luggage piled around them, as the captain politely but firmly ordered them to leave the marina. They were stranded in Greece, thousands of miles from home, with no money, no yacht, and no luxury accommodations. They had to spend the night in a cheap, cramped hostel, enduring the very discomfort they had planned to force upon me. 2 days later, the family managed to secure emergency flights back to California using a credit card Helen Geller had kept hidden. Late in the afternoon, their taxi pulled up in front of the Santa Barbara estate. But the home they arrived at was unrecognizable. The massive iron gate was secured with a brand new electronic lock. 2 private security guards stood at the entrance, their faces expressionless. A large sign hung on the gate, "Property of Payne Acquisitions, LLC. Private property, no trespassing. What is going on?" Beatrice shrieked, rushing to the gate and shaking the bars. "This is our house! Open this gate!" One of the security guards stepped forward. "This property was sold 3 days ago. The new owner is Curtis Payne. You have no legal right to be here." Sean stood on the sidewalk, his face pale and his chest heaving. He turned and looked toward the curb. Piled in a messy, chaotic heap next to the garbage bins were all of their personal belongings. Beatrice's designer clothes, Sean's expensive golf clubs, luxury watches, electronics, and boxes of high-end cosmetics had been stuffed into black garbage bags and torn cardboard boxes. A large handwritten sign in thick marker was taped to the pile. "Free yard waste and belongings. Help yourself." Several neighbors and passersby had gathered around the pile, sorting through the designer clothes and loading boxes into the trunks of their cars. "Don't touch my things," Beatrice screamed, running toward a woman who was holding one of her expensive handbags. She looked completely unhinged, her hair wild and her clothes wrinkled from the long flight. The spectacle was a total public humiliation. The Geller family's carefully crafted mask of elegance was shattered in the middle of a dusty street. Richard and Helen Geller looked at their screaming daughter in horror. Without saying a single word, Richard flagged down a passing taxi, loaded their luggage, and climbed inside with his wife. They rolled up the windows and drove away, abandoning Beatrice and Sean on the sidewalk to face the crowd that was openly laughing at them. Sean collapsed onto the curb, his head in his hands. Realizing the full scope of the disaster, my phone rang as I sat in the international terminal of the airport, waiting for my flight to Italy. I answered it. "Dad?" Sean's voice was cracked and trembling, filled with a desperate childlike panic. "Dad, please help us. The house is sold, our money is frozen, and Beatrice is losing her mind." "Where are you? What did you do?" "I am at the airport, Sean," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a deep-sea current. "I am boarding a flight to Europe. I am going to charter a boat and scatter your mother's ashes in Santorini the way she wanted. I am doing it alone." "Dad, you can't do this to us," he sobbed. "We are your family. Family does not forge deeds to steal a father's home, Sean," I said. "Bradley Thorne met with the district attorney yesterday. Sharon Vance, the notary, confessed to accepting the $28,500 bribe to forge my signature on the quitclaim deed. The deed is void ab initio under Penal Code Section 470, which means the transfer to your LLC never legally existed. The DA is preparing felony forgery warrants for both you and Beatrice, and our civil lawsuit under Welfare and Institutions Code 15.6.10.30 for elder financial abuse will ensure that every dollar you tried to steal is recovered, with treble damages." There was a long, dead silence on the line. The weight of his decisions had finally caught up to him. "I spent 35 years salvage engineering," I continued quietly. "I know how to lift heavy structures, and I know how to clear away wreckage. You and Beatrice tried to bury me, but you forgot that I am the one who knows how to operate the crane. Have a good life, Sean." I hung up the phone and turned it off. I stood up, picked up my small carry-on bag containing Clara's ashes, and walked toward the boarding gate. As I sat in the airport terminal, watching the planes land and take off against the backdrop of the evening sky, I thought about the ironies of life. I had spent 35 years salvaging sunken vessels, pulling valuable ships out of the mud and restoring them to service. I had believed that if you just give enough support, you can save anything, but some structures are too rusted to salvage. Sometimes, the most professional thing you can do is let the wreck sink, clear the channel, and ensure that the shipping lanes remain open for those who actually respect the rules of the sea. Sean had chosen to align himself with the Gellers, trading his father's love and his mother's memory for a fleeting taste of high society status. He had allowed Beatrice's greed to corrode his moral foundation, until there was nothing left but rust. The gate agent announced the final boarding call for my flight. I stood up, feeling a slight stiffness in my knee, but otherwise strong and steady. I carried Clara's ashes in a beautiful, hand-carved wooden urn inside my bag. Next week, I would hire a local Greek skipper in Santorini, sail out to that quiet, sun-drenched bay, and scatter her ashes into the crystal-clear waters where we had first met. It would be a private, peaceful farewell, free of greed and pretense, the way it was always meant to be. I walked down the jet bridge and stepped onto the airplane. The cabin door closed behind me, sealing out the noise of the terminal. I buckled my seatbelt and looked out the window as the engines roared to life, ready to chart a new course into the open ocean.